Everybody, welcome to Cover 4 Live. My name is Brandon Adams. Happy to have Connor Riley, Jeff Sintel, Mike Griffith all on hand as well as we talk about the latest going on with the Georgia Bulldogs here as the offseason starts to take shape and some of the themes that we'll be addressing over the course of the next couple of months start to come to the forefront. And when I take a look at the landscape here, it's interesting to note how different things seem for Georgia compared to a year ago when Georgia fans were rightfully anxious about who the quarterback was going to be, who the offensive coordinator was going to be, and yet felt like they could lean on paper, what appeared to be one of the best defenses in the country. Now you fast forward ahead to the 2021 calendar year, questions about the defense after the way it played against Florida and Alabama a year ago, but seemingly solid at offensive coordinator with Todd Monken, solid at starting quarterback with JT Daniels, more returning talent at wide receiver than probably Smart has ever had, and frankly, for a number of years prior to the Smart era beginning there as well. And because fans just generally speaking like offense better than defense, I sort of get the impression we're heading for a happier offseason here around UGA in Athens than maybe we had a year ago and maybe we've had in a couple of years. Jeff Sintel, would you agree with that sentiment?
I guess continuity maybe equals happiness there to many, Brandon. I don't know. That's the thing that rolls through my mind on our topic today is Georgia a better football team in January 2021 than it was in January 2020? So obviously, I think you laid out the pros and cons there. The defensive might of the 2020 squad, everybody thought was going to be vast. And everybody kind of thought the offense was going to be pretty good. Not sure about Monken, not sure about Jamie Newman as the quarterback. I'm sure most people think what they saw out of JT Daniels late 2020 was better than they thought maybe they were going to get out of Jamie Newman over the course of the year. And then a pandemic hit everybody in the mouth. I think for me, I don't know if it's better, especially personnel-wise on the back end, especially the way college football is structured now. I think Georgia is more likely to put up 40 points now in a big-time gangbusters game. I don't just know if they're more likely to hold somebody back under 39 points, especially with the departure of not just those secondary men, but also maybe a guy like Azeez Ojulari.
What do you think, Connor?
I mean, we've already sort of seen with Tyree Stevenson, sort of anything can sort of happen that we deem to be unpredictable. And, obviously the Jamie Newman thing comes to mind from this past offseason. And I think as we get closer and closer to that Clemson game, it's going to maybe turn from happiness, or maybe not happiness is the right term, but optimism to, I think, maybe a nervous energy sort of, just because you start off the year theoretically with a loss, and I'm not going to go full Jeff Sintel or full Mike Griffith here and predict bad things before they actually come to fruition. But if you start this year with a loss, it very rapidly changes the tenor and tone of the 2021 season. So I think as we get closer and closer to that Clemson game on September 4th, I think the tone of the offseason is going to change.
And Mike, do you get me on this? I'm not saying happy offseason means every Georgia fan thinks they're going to win the national championship, although I'm sure plenty of them probably do. It's more about wondering how good the pieces you already have can be, as opposed to going on a national search to even discover who those pieces are going to be. Offensive coordinator, quarterback, which Georgia did a year ago. I think there were some legit bad feelings related to Justin Fields' transfer before the 2019 season. And all of that's now in the rearview mirror. It's really all systems go with what Georgia has in place. And so even if there's pressure about meeting expectations and things like that, at least you kind of know, presuming there's not some sort of bad news on the horizon, at least you kind of know what you're going into the upcoming season with. And I think for Georgia fans, Mike, that's a pretty welcome change.
Yeah, I think you're right, Brandon. I think having a returning quarterback makes a big difference. When Jake Fromm left, you were going to have a new quarterback for the first time in 4 years, right? A new coordinator. We really didn't know much about Todd Monken. We really didn't know much about Jamie Newman. We still don't. Dwan Mathis was coming off of the brain surgery. Carson Beck was the guy we were talking about, Jeff. Jeff said so many great things about Carson Beck, and he's just suddenly forgotten now for Brock Vandagriff. It's amazing what a difference makes in a year. So I do think there's probably a steadier optimism. I also think that Clemson game, though, at the beginning looms large, as Connor said. I don't necessarily think that if you lose to Clemson, you're out. But I also think people are probably, and I don't want to speak for you guys, but I think people are probably more optimistic that Georgia's going to beat Clemson in the opener than how they felt about Georgia playing in Tuscaloosa last season.
That could be true. That's a pretty interesting comparison, actually, that, Clemson, for whatever reason, doesn't quite feel as invincible, doesn't quite feel as bulletproof. Obviously, there is a difference between Trevor Lawrence, a quarterback, and DJ Uiagalelei, a quarterback, and, kind of whatever else is going on. I mean, I think that's probably pretty fair, Jeff, that you may get a few more folks picking Georgia to beat Clemson than maybe around this time a year ago, picking Georgia to go in Tuscaloosa to beat Alabama, even though I probably regret some of the things that I said about that Alabama game this time a year ago. I don't know that my thoughts were necessarily a reflection on the larger opinion overall.
Yeah, I think I'd like to, I guess I'd applaud Connor for taking this discussion in a place I didn't think it was immediately going to go, and that was to the Clemson game. My take on 2021, and call it a way too early take, is I think by and large this season will be defined by how they play against Clemson, at least the image of the Georgia team. You already see a lot of analysts and pundits saying that the winner of that game is going to be ranked the number 1 team in the country after week 1. And it's going to probably be a 2 Clemson versus a number 4 Georgia, something like that. And here's the part where I'm going to say 2 things. One, I'm trying not to sound like Kirby Smart, but I think this year Georgia is basically more about what Georgia does and not what the other guys are doing. For that game, for example, I think Georgia, the woes won't be so much its secondary, it won't be so much its pass rush. I think it's going how well they're going to block Clemson, period. I think that new line, I think Clemson's strength of their ball club next year will be their defensive line, which could have another 4 or 5 future NFL draft picks across it. That's one. I think the other thing that when I think it reflects back towards Georgia is simply that. I was talking to Terrence Edwards this week, and Terrence Edwards told me something I hadn't really considered is he said, all right, look at this one thing. Florida was gangbusters on offense. Alabama was gangbusters on offense. Why? He pointed to offensive continuity. They had the same quarterback returning. They had the same offensive coordinator returning, whereas Georgia, new offensive coordinator, new quarterback A, new quarterback B, new quarterback C. You had to install said new offense digitally during spring practice over a Zoom technology and over lots and lots of meetings. I think that's what hamstrung Georgia a lot in 2020. But for me, the juice, the momentum for 2021 is how are you going to beat Clemson? You got to figure out a way to block, which I think are 4 former 5-stars across their defensive front.
Let me also say this, and, Mike, Connor, anybody who wants to can kind of step in and speak on this. Georgia is losing some very good players off the 2020 roster, guys that I have great respect for. Azeez Ojulari comes to mind, Richard LeCounte comes to mind. You kind of go on through the list and talk about whoever you want to talk about. But with all due respect to those guys, I don't know that the task of replacing any of them is necessarily what I would call, air quotes here, scary. Obviously, you don't have a Richard LeCounte necessarily waiting in the wings at safety, but that's not the same thing as replacing some starting quarterback who's been the juggernaut for your offense for years and years and years. Same thing for Ojulari, who is going to be a very high draft pick, I would expect. Generate a lot of pass pressure for Georgia a year ago, but it's not like there aren't options of guys who might be able to do that. Georgia's got very good players from the 2020 team that won't be back for 2021, but the task of replacing them, I would suggest, isn't insurmountable.
Yeah, and I would even say you look at obviously the biggest position in terms of replacing guys comes in the secondary, but I don't know how you watch college football this past season and say the secondary play matters all that much, especially with the way these elite programs have great wide receivers now. And if you have a competent / good offensive coordinator, you're going to be able to scheme ways to get them open. You watched the national championship game the other night. The best player, while Patrick Surtain will be the first player taken from that Alabama defense, Christian Barrymore was the best player for Alabama in that game defensively. And I think he really opened up a lot of things for them to do to where they had the success that they needed to in that game. So, well, yeah, secondary is a concern. I think BA is largely right here. I think Adam Anderson can replace a lot of the statistical production that Azeez Ojulari brought from a season ago. You bring back Jordan Davis. Jeff mentioned a few minutes ago that that game's going to come down to how well Georgia blocks Clemson. Conversely, I think point blank, the winner of that game is the team that blocks better because Georgia's got a pretty stout front as well. And Clemson's offensive line just got embarrassed against Ohio State in the college football playoff semifinal. So while, yes, there are some concerns in the secondary there, and chiefly for me along the offensive line, I think to BA's larger point, a lot of what left Georgia off this 2020 team can be replaced. And we even saw, Richard LeCounte was replaced by Chris Smith, and he made some real nice strides in that Peach Bowl. So there are some nice pieces there that Georgia can replace going into the 2021 season.
It's Cover 4 Live. Happy to have Connor Riley, Mike Griffith, Jeff Sintel on hand. My name is Brandon Adams. Of course, you read all these folks at DogNation.com throughout the week. It's great to get a chance to hear from them through the magic of video here right now. I want to move on to our next topic. Georgia got good news this week when running back Zamir White said that he also views himself as having unfinished business for the upcoming season, returning for 2021. As I said before, getting that kind of talent back is good news, but it also comes with the challenge of figuring out how you manage the running back depth, because White won't be the only one wanting carries for the upcoming season. Obviously, James Cook is back. He was explosive near the end of the year. Kendall Milton showed a lot of promise in his freshman season, and there's still plenty of intrigue about what Kenny McIntosh may be able to do with more carries. To say nothing of Dejean Edwards, who I actually thought looked pretty good in the moments that he got as a freshman in 2020, and the arrival of Lavassier Carroll there as well as a 2021 signee. Mike, how does Georgia manage all these running backs?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we got to figure out a couple of things. One, the pace of play and how many plays a game are they running? Just doing a little research, you'll see Clemson was running about 12 more plays per game than Georgia was. That's one thing Georgia can do to really help themselves out, is speed up the pace of play a little bit. And, where will Kirby Smart be with that? Will he be willing to have maybe a little bit more of an offensive mentality, and rather than play to what we thought was a championship defense the last couple of years and run clock and things like that, maybe go up tempo more often so that you can get your playmakers a lot of touches. You're going to want to see George Pickens probably get 10 targets a game, right? He's your go-to guy. Jermaine Burton is a guy that's emerged. We wonder about Dominique Blaylock and what he can bring. Darnell Washington is a guy that looks like he's worthy of targets in the game. So, and then offensively, James Cook and Kenny McIntosh, these are guys that have proven they can catch the ball. Where was Kenny McIntosh? Well, he was winning the game. He caught 3 balls on the final drive. That was Kenny out there, not Zamir White, with the game on the line and 1:28 left. So these are running backs that are versatile and can do different things. And then you wonder about Kendall Milton and Zamir White. And to me, Zamir White's decision to come back probably affects Kendall Milton more than any of the other backs, as you look to see who your goal line back will be, who will be the starter. So there's a lot of different considerations that will be determined by the direction of the offense, pace of play, how many plays a game they run, and the pass run ratio as well.
Jeff, I think that Mike brings a pretty good point in one respect, in that in previous iterations of the Georgia offense, the ones led by Jim Chaney and James Coley, Georgia probably just wasn't running enough plays to get multiple playmakers involved. Now, it's not easy to get as many, guys that want catches and running backs who want carries. It's not easy to get all of them involved either. But if you are a more explosive offense, if you are playing at a slightly more up-tempo pace where you get more plays called per game, I think Mike's right, Jeff, that it does become a little bit easier to get more players involved, multiple running backs, multiple pass receiving targets. I don't think that's a bad point.
Yeah, I think one of the things Kenny did really well is he was a great option out of the backfield. Was he the type of pass protector earlier in the phases of the game that maybe Zamir White was? I think that's an arguable point. I think Zamir looked like the best pass protector on the team, and that's one of the things that usually hamstrings a lot of young backs. Is I remember many a Georgia back going through the years where everybody heard the whispers from fall camp. He's ready to play. He's ready to run. But is he ready to protect the quarterback? I think everybody knows how important it will be to protect JT Daniels in 2021. I think the thing to look at here is I know that thought about, hey, where's Kendall going to get his 12 carries? How's Zamir going to end up with another 14 carries again? What does that do to the offense and the touches and the run pass ratio? I kind of look at it that Kendall Milton was going to set to assume the number 2 back or 1B back through the course of this season, but of the last season, but an injury happened. I mean, injuries have happened to Kenny McIntosh. Injuries have happened all up and down the depth chart. I think when you think Georgia, you've got to think, I think it's kind of the way you look at recruiting, Brandon. The more running backs you have, you just go ahead and say one of them is going to probably have a ding that keeps him from playing at optimum health. Another one's going to have a ding during the season that's going to keep him, maybe make him miss a couple of games. And then you're going to have another guy you're going to have to spell during the course of a game. So right away, you're at 4 running backs you need. I know the number for Georgia has always been 5 running backs. I'd look for Lavassier Carroll to be more of an asset in the return game going on. So for me, I just thought Milton was pacing to become a featured back at Georgia last year. And it wasn't Georgia's fault. It was just the unfortunate situation that happened in Tennessee. I think the best back will rise. I want to go back to 2019. DeAndre Swift was certainly the best back Georgia had. Excuse me. I want to go back to 2018. DeAndre Swift was certainly the best running back Georgia had that year. But then you saw Elijah Holyfield rise to the mix, and Elijah Holyfield somehow found his way right at the 1,000-yard mark. And Elijah Holyfield, probably not the type of back that we see from a Kenny McIntosh, Kendall Milton, and a Zamir White already. So I just think a lot of these things, Georgia's going to find somebody that's effective for them and helps them do what they want to do. I think Cook should have a greater role in third down, all-purpose, seeing some more slot receiver type duty type things. I think that's where James Cook can get a lot more of his touches.
Connor, I think what Jeff is saying is probably, pretty true as well, that for me, Zamir coming back, and I'm saying this as a fan, it's almost all good news because Zamir's a very good player, and Zamir's presence back on this team for 2021, I don't think is a lid on the progression for anybody else in this backfield because, as Jeff said, Georgia, for the most part, when it has felt like it had multiple running backs capable of contributing, has given opportunities for those multiple backs. One time that it didn't really do that was in 2019 when I think that Georgia really felt like it had DeAndre Swift head and shoulders above, the rest. Other than that, Georgia's kind of trying to find some room for multiple backs. So Zamir coming back for me is almost all good. I don't see a lot of bad with it because I don't think he's going to be a barrier to progress for some of the other running backs who, admittedly, Georgia fans would like to see a little bit more of too.
Yeah, I think the thing that benefits Zamir more than anything is he nails all the little things that you need a really good running back to do. He is the best pass blocking running back Georgia has right now. He is an absolute weapon in special teams, whether as a blocker, a returner, or even as a guy who blocked a punt this season. He still scored 11 touchdowns and had, I think, 780 rushing yards this season in a 10-game season. And two of those games at the end, I think we can pretty clearly put the rushing struggles on the offensive line against Cincinnati and Mississippi State there. Because, we all saw the highlight run he had running through about 3-4 Cincinnati defenders in that game. I'll be interested to see. I think Mike sort of hit the nail on the head. The guy that is, I think, most impacted by Zamir coming back is Kendall Milton. And what does this mean for him? Obviously, he showed some really impressive flashes early on in this year. And you wonder, with more carries, is he able to sustain that, or does that dip a little bit? Obviously, some people want to see him get more carries. Some people want to see Kenny McIntosh get more carries. But keeping those guys fresh, allow them over the course of the game to do what they really do. And with a guy like Zamir White, I think when Georgia has leads late in the game, they have a finishing running back that can sort of salt the game away and is physical enough to really do body blows to the opposing defense.
And Mike, here's the thing I'll say about Kendall Milton. When Milton was a recruit, he talked openly about wanting to play with Zach Evans, ended up not working out, wanting to play with Tank Bigsby, that ended up not working out. But there were plenty of quotes that Milton gave to Jeff where he talked about joining another running back in the class of, I guess it's been 2020. Am I right about that? The class of 2020. So the notion that Milton is uncomfortable in a running back tandem situation, he was comfortable with that in his own class. So the idea that somehow now he would not thrive in a situation where he'd be sharing carries with guys like Cook and White again. I mean, from Milton's own words, we've seen him be comfortable with that in the past.
Yeah, it all sounds good before you get here. But when you're talking about a quintuple, not a duo, you're talking about 5 backs, maybe even 4 if we're going to pretend like Dejean Edwards is going to be happy with 0 carries as a sophomore. Something I'd point out about Kenny McIntosh is, and really the other backs in pass protection, I think not having a spring hurt the younger backs. I think pass protection can be learned. And sometimes even if you know it, if you don't remember the play, it can hurt you. You go back to the interception on the opening drive. Zamir White jumped out of the way of the oncoming rusher, and JT Daniels gets hit as he throws. It leads to the interception, something I didn't notice until I watched the replay. So I'm not sure that the pass blocking thing is going to hold water after spring drills. And I guess my final take on that is this isn't really settled yet. I think we're going to see these guys go through spring, and I think there's still the chance that somebody transfers. And not necessarily because Georgia's not a great place, but because at some point these running backs are going to have an opportunity to learn what is my role expected to be. And if you're a Zamir White guy and they say, sorry, Zamir, we can't promise you 10 touches a game, maybe you transfer to NC State where they can tell you they'll give you 18 to 25. Or if you're Kendall Milton, maybe you don't want to keep, traveling across the country because they won't give you more than 6 or 7 carries. And Oregon's got a job waiting on you. and because this is the era we're in. We kind of started talking about that at the beginning of the show about how there's that anxiety and that nervousness after what happened with Tyreek Stevenson, a guy that said, hey, I need to start this game or I might leave. And they say, okay, you start. And he leaves anyway, right? I mean, here's a guy who was in position, I think, to really evolve and be a real star in that Georgia secondary. And he was willing to leave that behind and go to Miami. I look at Jermaine Johnson, a guy that was primed to take over as the lead pass rusher with Azeez Ojulari. And he says to Georgia, see you later. I want more work somewhere else. I don't think this is unique to Georgia. I think this is happening all across America. And, some of this legislation that's pending on the immediate transfers, it's kind of been put on hold. And I think that's kind of put the ice on some of this movement that we've been seeing. But BA, by the time we get to May, after spring drills, after things kind of sort themselves out a little bit, and Georgia has a better idea of, what is the pace of play and who are the guys that are going to get the targets and what is my role going to be, I think you'll see some players make some informed decisions, and you'll probably see another transaction period like you did after this season. And maybe all the running backs stay. I want to be clear on that. That's another possibility. But I also think there's still a chance that somebody could leave there or even at another position. Maybe the offensive line. There's a lot of big guys talented on that offensive line.
So, Connor, I'm not really comfortable yet making any kind of prediction about, somebody making a decision, like that. But I will say, as someone who's had his problems with the transfer portal, I'll certainly admit that. As a head coach, if I'm Kirby Smart, I can't make decisions on the basis of that, being afraid of who might leave. We live in kind of a, open age. I always want to say liberal, but people take that as a political thing. In kind of an open age for when it comes to the transfer portal right now. And I'm not always a huge fan of that, but it does exist. You have to make your peace with that. And if I'm coaching, I got to put the best 11 out there, even if it's just incrementally better one guy compared to the next. I can't coach in fear of the transfer portal. I think that's a way a coach gets himself in trouble.
Yeah, I think that's a great phrase. You can't coach in fear of the transfer portal. And look, I'll even point to the Justin Fields thing because that hung over Georgia for a while. And reality is Jake Fromm and Justin Fields won the same number of college football playoff games. They both had a national title loss to Alabama. And while, yes, I think Justin Fields is the more talented quarterback, I also think even if Kirby does start him for the Florida game in 2018 and Jake Fromm is the one who hits the transfer portal and Justin Fields stays, I still don't think in 2019 they're beating LSU and in 2020 they're beating Alabama. You cannot let this transfer portal dictate the now. Like, yes, Kendall Milton could absolutely be a better running back than Zamir White. But if Zamir White is a better running back now, you have to use that and take that opportunity to try and win a championship now, which is what Georgia did in 2018 when they stuck with Jake Fromm over Justin Fields. And hindsight, yeah, Fields was obviously, I think, the more talented quarterback. But seeing how everything plays out, you have to absolutely make a decision that is going to help you win in the now. And if that's Kendall Milton getting more carries now, then Georgia's going to do that. But they can't necessarily worry or think about, hey, transfer portal, player X might leave. Cade Mays did that last offseason, and Georgia's offensive line was just fine. And quite frankly, Tennessee's offensive line wasn't all that much better with Cade over there.
Jeff, let me also make this comparison for a moment. If you watch the national championship game on Monday, Devontae Smith, the Heisman Trophy winner, has a dazzling first half. But in addition to that, Najee Harris also had 2 touchdowns in the first half as well, which is just another reminder that even in the midst of this unprecedented passing success that Alabama enjoyed this past season, they were still very stout in the running game. Najee Harris had one of the best single seasons that any Bama running back has ever had, probably just south of Derrick Henry, maybe Mark Ingram. Harris had, that kind of season this year for Alabama, which if you want to make the comparison to Georgia, you expect the passing attack to be upgraded year 2 of Todd Monken, an entrenched starting quarterback now with JT Daniels, robust talent at the wide receiver position, the likes of which I don't think Georgia's had really a long time. And yet I am still wondering, well, how big of a part of the offensive equation is the running game still going to be? I think most Georgia fans, want to see a little bit more of a imbalance in favor of the passing game because that's what the best teams have done. But when you see Alabama win this year's national championship, you're reminded that the running game still does matter.
Yeah. Hey, Brendan, I got a good thought here, but this is just blasting through my mind right here. I got to see what that character is on your shirt, man. Every time you talk, I'm sitting there wondering what it is. All right.
This is my Dan Mullen clown shirt.
Yeah. See, that's what I thought.
It's too cold for a regular T-shirt today, so I just threw this underneath the hoodie, the hoodie zipper.
Brandon, do you have that in purple, blue, red, and silver? Or
All the
how many
colors, yeah, all the colors. I'd have it in cufflinks if I could. I'd have it in like a lapel pin. I'd have it whatever that is made. What is this? The what's the name of this company, Connor? Do you know the name of the company? I forget the name of the company, but 70 whatever it is. Maybe they could start making all kinds of like lapel pins and cufflinks and everything else. I apologize for not giving them a correct plug, but yeah.
Boy, Brandon must really like your product because he normally doesn't plug drop on his air. So
Yeah.
that's pretty
Well, no, I mean, but they are the true artists that created this, so I'll give them a little credit for it.
Brandon, I'm gonna say something callous about your point you're making there. And I mean, listen, all these running backs, they're great representatives of Georgia. They're great people. They have great families. I got one stat here. I'm gonna give you this. Who has more 10 carry games in their career? Dejean Edwards or the field of James Cook, Kendall Milton, and Kenny McIntosh?
It's Dejean Edwards.
Yeah. Dejean's got 2. That group of 3 right there has 2 combined collectively. And that's through 5 seasons of NCAA SEC football right now. So obviously those guys hadn't gotten a lot of work yet in the run game already. But here's what happens, Brandon. To me, what's going to happen is going to take place on the practice field organically. The best backs will rise to the top. They won't be, edged out, or they won't be conspiracy theoried out. What's going to happen is the 2 or 3 best backs will get the best reps and get the ability to shine during spring ball and a lot of those workouts, and it will sort itself out. And if it becomes a thing where 1 or 2 guys say, this is just not me, I'm not feeling it, I'm not getting the run I need, that's the way it just always works out. The practice field, the reps, the rotation will sort themselves out. And if somebody gets upset with that, someone decides, hey, I think the grass is greener on the other side. Everybody remembers those tweets. That's going to happen. And everybody wants to say, I'll believe it when I see it, Brandon, when Georgia's run pass ratio gets any higher than 55 or 58% throwing the ball compared to running the ball. I just don't think it's in Kirby's DNA. I think Kirby Smart's DNA, even with Todd Monken holding the reins, I think 50-50, 55, that sort of thing, 45. I think Connor had a great stat he threw out on one of our recent broadcasts that Georgia wasn't even throwing the ball, even when it went past happy over the last 2 or 3 weeks of the season. Georgia still wasn't even throwing the ball 60% during those times, during those snaps, whatever. So for me, I'm not going to be fearful for the Georgia fan thinking, okay, you've got to keep him happy. Got to keep that guy happy. No, you got to keep the scoreboard and your best players on the field happy. And then if those guys decide there's a better place for Georgia, kind of like what Adam Anderson did, kind of what Tyreek Stevenson did, then that's just the way college football is wired today. You looked at the Alabama game. Here's what I saw. Brian Robinson has been waiting 3 dadgum years to play behind Najee Harris. And Brian Robinson looked as effective in the national championship game behind Najee Harris as anything I've seen from Kenny McIntosh, as anything I've seen from Zamir White, as anything I've seen from James Cook, period. Dejean Edwards, throw him in there too. That's the backup back at Alabama. And you know why he's happy is because they're still winning. But Alabama's got 3 or 4 dudes just like that. That's what big time college football is. You think, McGowan's happy waiting all those turns? You think Trey Sanders, the former number 1 back in the country, is happy waiting for him? What about Brian Robinson as well? I mean, when you just have a guy that's the dude that wants to come back, everybody's feelings and carries and reps are going to get hurt a little bit.
So let me do a short question, easy answer for everybody. Jeff, I'll start with you. I would say that the Georgia running backs that are in place now, several of them have shown good capabilities. I don't know that a great running back has emerged from this group yet. Do you think there's a great running back in this group?
Not based on what we've seen. I think to me, all around, Zamir looks like the best running back in the group, especially because I think he's going to get another year outside of that knee injury. He's had some relatively very good health over the last 2 seasons of his career. I think when you combine all the things, Zeus's veteran skills, I mean, they gave him a lot of between the tackle carries during this year. Maybe not the best setups for him to bust a lot of big gains. You only see flashes with Zeus. I want to see more consistent excellence.
Mike, how about you? Do you see the potential for a great running back among this group?
Yeah, I think Kendall Milton can be that guy if he can stay healthy. He had a hamstring. He came late and had a hamstring in fall camp. And so we didn't see a lot of him. I thought in the Tennessee game and the Auburn game, he really showed some flashes of greatness, breaking a lot of tackles, something Zamir really didn't do a lot of. Even on his long runs, that was one that formation floored a little bit. nobody touches him, a couple bursts up the middle. But Milton's a guy that breaks tackles. The thing that holds Kendall back, and I think he'll get better at, is catching the ball. But I still think primarily a ball carrier. As far as, James Cook and Kenny, I think there's a lot to like about each. I think both has room to grow. I didn't really like seeing James Cook run between the tackles. It really didn't look like his cup of tea. But you get him on the perimeter, and anytime you go 82 yards on Alabama, you got to be a pretty good player. He's got that breakaway speed. Still need to see more out of him on the balance aspect. And, he looked kind of rusty. He hurt that shoulder early. But Kenny's got a lot of vision, and Kenny's a great pass catcher. I think, we saw that on the final drive. There was a lot of trust from Georgia to Kenny McIntosh, 3 catches on the game-winning drive. A guy that only running back in the backfield that did not fumble the ball last year. We saw Zamir fumble against Cincinnati. Fortunately, it was recovered. So I think they're very close. I think it is going to be sorted out on the practice field. And I think that, any type of taking a back seat for seniority because somebody's worked hard, I think that's out the window. I think the staff's on notice that these players want to see it sorted out on the field and not based on recruiting rankings and seniority.
Connor, how about for you? Do you see the potential for a great running back in this group? Because I don't think we've seen greatness from any of these guys yet.
You're right. We haven't seen greatness from any of them. I think Mike touched on reasons Kendall Milton has it. I think Jeff touched on reasons Zamir White did it. And the farther we get away from Zamir White's injury history, you look at a guy like Nick Chubb, who had a very catastrophic knee injury his sophomore year at Georgia, and year 3, year 4 away from those injuries, he looked like the running back he was in 2014. So I certainly think there's the potential for greatness. And just as a reminder, as fantastic as Najee Harris was, he was a former number 1 overall running back. He looked nothing like he did this past season. He came back for his senior year and looked fantastic, improved as a pass catcher over the offseason, was a real weapon for Alabama this year. So right now, is there a great running back? I don't know. Is there potential for Georgia to have one? Absolutely.
It's Cover 4 Live. I should point out that we are actually not live today, so maybe it's not truthful advertising here. We are on our normal time slot, but not broadcasting live, so we can't react to your comments during the show, but we certainly appreciate you being a part of it and look forward to being back in our live time slot again very soon. Scheduling conflicts required us to get this thing done a little early. I want to change the subject here for a moment because I have been fascinated by some of the drama going on around the SEC right now. And it's hard to beat the anger that exists at South Carolina for what Auburn has done to them, stealing all their assistants lately. I mean, it is white hot rage in Columbia right now. But believe it or not, the Tennessee stuff may even be more interesting than that. So let's touch on all this for a moment. Mike, I want to start with you because you know the landscape in Knoxville as well as probably anybody does. The idea that it seems like Tennessee is trying to push Jeremy Pruitt out, welcoming an NCAA investigation as justifiable cause to do so. But lo and behold, within the last few days, Tennessee has made one of the most significant hires of the offseason, bringing in Kevin Steele. Last year, Steele was the nation's highest paid assistant coach. They get him for a relative bargain. Sounds like it was Pruitt himself who's made this hire, not the institution itself. At least that's based on some of the chatter coming out of Knoxville. Is hiring Steele either evidence that Pruitt will keep his job or enough to convince big-time folks within the administration there in Knoxville that Pruitt should keep his job? What do you think about the situation at Tennessee, Mike?
I think it's a real wait and see. I think it's a precautionary measure. Kevin Steele was one of the 3 finalists for the head coaching job at Tennessee, along with Mel Tucker and Jeremy Pruitt. This was a guy that, I personally thought was going to get the job. I mean, he is a former Tennessee Vol player. And, how close he was to thinking he got the Auburn job. So do we really believe that Kevin Steele would go to Tennessee? A couple of things would we really believe. Would he really go there for a $500,000 salary, number one? Number two, would Jeremy Pruitt really hire Kevin Steele to run his defense? Would Kevin Steele go somewhere where he wasn't going to run the defense? To me, that's the not the dog bites man. That's the man bites dog. Believe that these 2 guys are both going to sit in the room and discuss the game plan, and one's going to give power to the other. So that to me is a bit of a red flag, just knowing the personalities of Jeremy and Kevin Steele. Could it end up where they both work together? I suppose. But to me, if you're Tennessee and you can't hire a new head coach until Jeremy Pruitt is fired, maybe you bring him on your staff as a defensive coordinator, or actually, I don't even know that he has that title.
No, he does not.
Yeah.
So,
He was only hired as defensive assistant. So it's been speculated by some Tennessee reporters that he will be linebackers coach based on the current separation of powers. But as you said, there's plenty of open doors for him to take on a number of roles depending on how things go down. But for now, the official word from Tennessee is that he is a defensive assistant.
yeah, so maybe you fill out your staff, you send the shot up that, hey, nothing to what is the scene? Nothing to see here, right? And the fire and the explosions as the Porter fills up with 16 volunteers. I believe Wanye Morris now, the 5-star tackle, and DeAndre Johnson, a guy that I interviewed in Miami, and he's in the portal. Perhaps Ty Chandler, your senior running back, he's in the portal. I mean, with the last one in
Knoxville, Chandler's got a new home now too. I think he's
Chandler and Johnson both have
North Carolina. Yeah. The last one out of Knoxville, please turn out the lights. So, it's a situation where I suppose you can't really rush this situation. It does appear that this NCAA investigation is taking place. They're investigating themselves. The last time they hired, I think this was the Glazier firm that was there when they to protect Bruce Pearl, and actually didn't protect Bruce Pearl at all. He actually worked against Bruce Pearl, and that's why Bruce Pearl said, never testifying again, never talking if I don't have to, because when you do cooperate, you're basically burying yourself, as it turns out, as we see how these cases work out. So to me, there's a lot, Brandon. There's a lot there. I think there's a lot of uncertainty, but I think bringing in Kevin Steele is a way to kind of cover yourself. If Jeremy does get fired, I think you've got head coaching waiting on the staff. If he doesn't get fired, you filled out your staff with a veteran coach. And maybe you put out the appearance and you try to, I saw where Sean Schamberger, one of their top corners, was in the portal. Now he's no longer in the portal. So maybe that settles things down a little bit for folks.
What's better for you, Connor? What's happening there at Tennessee, or Auburn literally stealing every assistant off South Carolina's coaching roster?
Oh, I'm going to go see here. You're missing the big story. It's Alabama's staff getting raided by none other than Steve Sarkisian. It sounds like he's taking Kyle Flood, the offensive line coach, who did a fantastic job with what they had there, with him to Texas, the offensive coordinator. And then today, if you follow recruiting, Jeff Banks, I believe is his actual name. The reason Alabama has cleaned up in the state of Texas is because of Banks. He is now going to Texas and getting a significant raise to do so there. So Alabama's going to have to make a lot of changes on that offensive staff. And Mike touched on earlier tonight on sort of the importance of continuity and the role that plays. And then if there's a farther, maybe not in the SEC story, but college football as a whole, Urban Meyer is going to be the new head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And from the rumblings that we've heard, it sounds like he's really going to raid the Ohio State staff for some of his assistants there, just based on the connections that he has. So Ryan Day is going to have his opportunity to go around to a lot of staffs across the country, essentially restart this domino period of the coaching carousel and say, hey, you want to come be Ohio State's wide receivers coach, Ohio State's defensive coordinator, so to say. There's going to be a lot of openings out there that have to be refilled again at one of the premier programs in Ohio State and Alabama as well on the offensive side of the ball right now.
Yeah, Connor, I think that's a great description of both those situations. Jeff, what do you think about everything that's going on right now?
Yeah, it's funny. The first saw the Tennessee mess. People forget Derek Ansley came to that job from the Raiders, and they dangled some defensive coordinator keys to him as well. He's the secondary coach. Pruitt was always hands-on with his defense, and what's Steele going to do? I think Mike had the point that was salient in my mind, which was, is this the head coach in waiting? Is that what's happening here, or the fall guy, or the guy that picks things up? I got a quick straw poll. I love interaction amongst the panel instead of everybody just talking all the time. Who's had the worst 30 days? Rank them, fellas. South Carolina, Tennessee, or the Florida Gators? Brandon, why don't you go first, man? Who's had the worst 30 days so far?
It's undoubtedly South Carolina. What has happened to their program has been as much of an unmitigated disaster as anything I've ever seen. And frankly, if I could just make a quick point here, the comparison to another coach hired last year that did not have coordinator experience, Sam Pittman leaving as offensive line coach at Georgia, going to be head coach at Arkansas, the ease with which he put together what I really think of is kind of an all-star staff. Kendall Braz, your offensive coordinator, Barry Odom as your defensive coordinator. Now, he's had his position coaches rated here a little bit, but in terms of his coordinators, and he held on to Barry Odom through this offseason, at least he has thus far. Pittman made this look much easier a year ago than it was. All of a sudden now, for Shane Beamer, who the one selling point he was supposed to have was his ability to attract other assistants, because when it comes to experience, he has none. He's not even a coordinator. And yet, offensive coordinator nobody's ever heard of, defensive coordinator nobody's ever heard of, head coach that nobody really believes in because all he's really got is famous last name. I think that South Carolina is heading for just an unmitigated disaster.
And what just broke, Brandon? Tracy Rocker is now the defensive line coach. He didn't even show up for a staff meeting one day, and now
just cleaned his office out. Just cleaned out his office and just jetted.
And so you got Carolina 1, Brandon. Is it Tennessee 2 or Florida 2 there? Who's had the worst 30 days?
I would say that it's probably Tennessee. I'd love to say it's been Florida because of obviously what's going on there. I think the Florida stuff's more weird than anything else. And I think a lot of that's probably just, for show. I don't believe Mullen's a real NFL coaching candidate. I also don't believe that Florida was as upset with him as Matt Hayes tried to make it sound like it was in Saturday Down South. To me, that's just saber rattling on both sides. The Tennessee situation, though, would seem to be something that's probably a little bit deeper of a program that feels like it has once again gone farther in the wrong direction than it wishes it could.
I have another sort of straw poll here. I love interaction as much as Jeff does, as opposed to us just spouting off at a time. It certainly seems like Jeremy Ford is on very shaky ground, and Dan Mullen sounds like we don't know what his future really holds for the long term anyway at Florida. As someone who likes to see Georgia be successful for a variety of reasons, and some of us are more biased than others here, but Georgia winning helps all of us. It rises all the tides, so to speak. Which potential firing, so to speak, or moving on or separation of ways scares you more? Pruitt at Tennessee or Mullen at Florida?
Mike, going to take that one on behalf of Georgia fans?
And what was the question?
Mm-hmm.
Which, as someone who is invested in Georgia being successful, which potential school moving on from their coach scares you more? Tennessee moving on from Pruitt or Florida moving on from Mullen?
Well, I'm kind of with you, Connor. I don't believe that Florida's going to move on from Mullen. What's happened at Tennessee is by far the worst, because at this time last year, Tennessee had won 6 straight games, and they were on the verge of having the number 2 recruiting class in the country as of last spring. I mean, you talk about a program that had stars in their eyes and thought they'd arrive. The question was, when was Tennessee going to beat Florida or Georgia? Now Tennessee is sunk like a rock. I mean, South Carolina's used to the view at the bottom of the East, if we're going to be honest about things. They really haven't been relevant since Steve Spurrier was there. I know they pulled an upset against Georgia last year in Sanford Stadium, but for the most part, South Carolina is an irrelevant football program. Tennessee on the one hand has the facilities and still has the delusions of grandeur, even though they haven't been to an SEC title game in, I guess it's 13 years now. Hard to believe.
South
I
Carolina's
don't know that either one of those concerns me because I think Georgia, I think Brandon said it at the beginning, or maybe it was Jeff that said, that Georgia needs to take care of Georgia, maybe now more than ever. And I kind of feel like that if Georgia stays on track and keeps Dan Lanning and keeps Todd Monken, then I think Georgia is a clear, far and away favorite. Florida, to me, has more potential than Tennessee because of the recruiting grounds. I think the Tennessee model is broken. They're not going to out-facility anyone any longer, and I don't think they can sell the success that they had with Peyton Manning or even Casey Clausen at the start of the new millennium. That said, I still, and I know that, Brandon's got the Dan Mullen clown shirt on, but he wasn't too much of a clown against Georgia this year when they put up 571 yards. I still think he's a pretty good coach. And if they can keep their house in order and overcome the show cause that they're dealing with, I still think they're a threat, especially if the game stays in Jacksonville. beyond 2023.
And Connor, let me give you just a quick final point on your question, slightly different take on it. I think the Tennessee situation is really interesting from this standpoint. The whole thing is being treated like as a Jeremy Pruitt failing, when really Pruitt is still very young in his tenure as a head coach. To me, though, the unspoken part about this, and it's always masterful how, Fulmer figures out a way to do this kind of stuff. This is really a story of his failing as an athletic director, because the guy that they are paying lawyers like $1,000 an hour to figure out a way to get rid of, Fulmer gave an extension to like a few weeks ago. I mean, like somehow no one seems to talk about this, that it was only a few weeks ago they were giving him a contract extension, and now they're looking to get rid of him. What is that if nothing other than a administrative failing, from a guy in Philip Fulmer, who I would say has no business being Tennessee athletic director. So it's really kind of funny who's constructing the narrative here, and somehow, some way, the spotlight never seems to land on Fulmer's own failings in this. Because the truth is, as much as Georgia fans might not want to hear this, I think that Jeremy Pruitt, if he can control his demeanor, could actually eventually stabilize himself and be a pretty good coach. I think he's just in a tough spot, taking over for what was a disastrous prior regime there at Tennessee.
Hey, Brandon, if you were podcasting at Head Dog Nation Daily every day back in 2006, would you have had a Phil Fulmer clown shirt on if they would have made one? I'm sure that's the 2005 version of that shirt, right?
The problem is you have to wear a XXX to get his whole face to fit in the thing. So you'd have to have a little bit bigger shirt to fit the entire face there, I guess.
Yeah, Brandon, you make good points. I mean, what is the leader of the program? Who's responsible? I think it's kind of interesting. The one part about the Dan Mullen story that I think is salient to me, the Matt Hayes article, everybody's caught eyes on, is the rollovers aren't happening. And you mentioned what was happening there with Pruitt. In order to succeed in the SEC recruiting ecosystem, he needed that extension. He needed that vote of confidence from Tennessee. And then all of a sudden, now they're looking. It almost feels like it's a fire drill or type of witch hunt to see what they can find on that's fireable. And then they've got their guy in place. I still need somebody to explain to me how hiring freeze happens, and yet Kevin Steele comes in. Is like,
yeah.
Is Jeremy Pruitt writing a check saying, I'm going to pay you LLC, I'm going to give you a 1090 form or whatever for 1099? How does this guy come in the midst of a hiring freeze? I don't understand.
It's really a more fascinating story than the coverage thus far would lead you to believe. I think you're seeing more coverage coming out about this in Knoxville now. But for a while, this thing was wild, and I don't think it was getting the media attention it probably should have gotten, because there was so much else going on. Connor, I know you wanted to say something about this. I'll give you the last word, because I do want to talk name, image, and likeness before we're done. So go ahead.
Yeah, Tennessee is pretty clearly trying to grease the wheels, I think, to get rid of Pruitt, whether it be this season or next offseason. And, freeze, I think, is the obvious one there. And I would just say Kevin Steele was the interim coach at Auburn. He has interim experience leading this sort of program. So I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if things get off the rails to start for Tennessee next year. They don't try and make a move early to justify getting a coach in place by signing day and try and move on early there. And as far as Florida, the interesting thing with Mullen is he sort of runs that thing as there's a chip on his shoulder. We're the underdogs. We're not supposed to be here and whatnot. That's not what Florida is. Florida's a juggernaut. Florida is what Georgia is supposed to. Georgia is what Florida is supposed to be. We're supposed to recruit the best players. We're supposed to be bigger and better than you. Just at Georgia, you usually do it with defense. Florida has done it with offense. And while Dan Mullen is a very, very good offensive mind, they haven't been that juggernaut. They lost. Honestly, everyone likes to throw out the Kirby Smart, March Richt comparison. Losing to LSU at home this year, that's a late tenure March Richt move. Mm-hmm. So losing the bowl game in the fashion that they did, I think that's a Mark Richt type move. So I'll be interested to see what's this next stage of evolution with Florida. Because their offense, while Kyle Trask and Kyle Pitts was great, and you still have some really good receivers there, it's going to look very different with whoever they have a quarterback next season.
I think that's really interesting. And listen, I'll give Mullen credit as a play caller. I think it showed up in the game against Alabama, which admittedly they worked close with. And it showed up against Georgia when they really, as Mike said a moment ago, put up a lot of yards, a lot of points. So I love kind of, criticizing Mullen. He gives you plenty of reasons to do so. But the play calling acumen did show up this year. At least even I have to admit that. All right, let me move on here. I'm always hesitant to bring up anything in the program that kind of feels like politics. But the truth is, this is an example of politics and sports intersecting, because you had a couple of senators, I guess most notably Cory Booker from New Jersey, but played college football at Stanford, really pushing the NCAA to get more aggressive with its pursuit of name, image, likeness benefits for players. I the idea of the transfer rule is kind of also come up here around the halls of Congress as well. And as we talk about this, I want us to be really careful to try to be as clear as we possibly can, because there's an aspect of this story that makes my eyes kind of gloss over, because it just kind of becomes like this alphabet soup of nonsense from time to time. So, Jeff, you cover recruiting. I'm going to start with you on this. Can you give us a thumbnail, a very short, very clear synopsis of what we need to know about where players benefiting off of their name, image, likeness kind of stands here at the moment?
Yeah, so guys, I don't know if I've ever articulated this to you guys, but I've kind of followed this maybe more than a curiosity for the last 18 to 20 months. I've even talked to a senator about some of this stuff. And what I've tried to do is figure out, what can I report? No. I want to know what's going to look like, what's going to be like. And for me, I think one of the most interesting facets is now the shift in the majority in the Senate has kind of stalled a lot of this stuff. I talked to a lot of former players about this stuff, and it's funny hearing from former players. I would have expected them to, by maybe by a wide margin, to say players need more control, the players need more rights. But yet, all I hear is the transfer portal is killing college football. It's killing these programs and what guys are trying to build. I can reference it to the Amarius Mims recruitment. One of the things he was telling me about it is he eventually was chopping it up, and he's like, okay, if I want to live in the state of Georgia when I'm done, or there's a name, image, and likeness thing where somehow the number 65 jerseys in the bookstore, I get a cut out of that. Or if I want to have an Amarius Mims football camp in Cochran, Georgia, and I want to do that in the offseason, and I'm much more likely to attract guests if I choose Georgia, which is the overwhelming favorite in my community. A lot of people, that local deals, that local merchandising, the fact that you can take your brand, look at Z3, look what Zamir White did last year. You could cut those deals on the side, and yet the fan base could support you. You could use your Instagram account as like a warehouse in terms of, go through this link, buy this shirt. You saw DeAndre Swift a few years back with the Beyond Blessed kind of mouthpieces that were customized and everything else. And it seems now, and I think it affects a lot of stories in college football, it almost was a layup, like a 3-foot putt, that this thing was going to get ratified in January, because the Congress wanted, the NCAA was pressuring Congress to say, hey, come up with something so we don't have all these individual states making up their own rules. California, namely, Florida, namely, as well. Florida is set to put its rules on the books in July. Whereas it's something that every coach is wondering about. There's rules. There was going to be a third party to decide what you could endorse, what you could market, what you couldn't. You couldn't have competing things, like you couldn't have a Toyota deal if Georgia was a Ford official thing else. You couldn't do not so stately endorsements like the liquor store or the grill and bar or any other establishments that didn't really speak purity of amateur athletics. Crap. It's very complicated. And I think what's happening now, when everybody was thinking they were going to get their one transfer free ticket in January, now that's off the table. I think it's muddied the waters for a lot of these decisions that were made by recruits in the 2021 class, thinking these new name and image and likeness deals were coming around.
Yeah, Connor, I think what's confusing about this for a lot of people, and I'll say for myself included, is I do think a lot of recruits think that they're going to be able to go somewhere, sell their jersey, sell their personal logo, and they're just not. What's being argued in the Senate right now is not individual rights, name, image, and likeness. It's sort of a group benefit where, those who play college football will kind of share from the same pie of money. I think it's been kind of described as the sort of the excess amount from TV contracts, things like that necessarily. But, I think programs don't mind the idea of recruits thinking they're going to go somewhere and sell their own T-shirts. But even the most ardent supporters of this within Congress, that's not what they're arguing for.
No, yeah. Some quick bullet points to know here. Jeff mentioned the change in the Senate from it being a Republican majority to basically now a 50-50 split with the vice president being the deciding vote. The Republicans wanted, I believe, a more pro-school NLI program, whereas the Democrats wanted a more, I think, player-friendly one. And to sort of boil this down, group licensing, it's great that you mentioned that term. group licensing is what we need to get the NCAA football game back.
Sure.
It was not going to happen with Republicans in Congress, or the Republican plan in Congress, I should specify there. That might look like it could happen with the Democrats thing there. So, and one other thing, the reason the transfer thing is getting involved in this is because the NCAA board of directors was set to have this meeting where they were going to ratify the NLI plan that they had laid out that didn't have a whole lot of teeth and was very much pro schools and not necessarily pro player, and also have that same vote on the transfer policy, which was expected to pass. The Department of Justice sends Mark Emmert a letter saying, hey, you're going to want to rewrite what you were planning to ratify. Emmert goes ahead and says, all right, we're going to postpone this meeting and push that back. And so because that whole meeting got pushed back, that pushes back the one-time transfer policy rule. And it's really put, I think, a lot of that stuff in terms of player movement and whatnot in pause. And that's possibly a reason you haven't seen a guy like Arik Gilbert decide what he's going to do yet, because if that doesn't get changed and the SEC has its own transfer rule that needs to get changed, that limits, I think, where he could potentially go and play next season. So the changeover is affecting a lot of things. And it's really just, once again, kick this can down the road when this can has been repeatedly kicked down the road by the NCAA for so long already as it is.
Mike, what do you think about all of this?
Yeah, I think Connor laid it out really well, and kicking the can down the road is a good way of putting it, or pushing the mayonnaise to the back of the refrigerator. I mean, this is going to create a sticky situation one way or the other. The name, image, likeness thing is going to be really fascinating to see how boosters get involved. Or does it go the direction of college basketball, where for years and years the tennis shoe companies would push recruits to one school or another, depending on if they were an Adidas school or a Nike school or an Under Armour school? How early are the sports agents, name, image, likeness people? How early can they get to these players? Will Jeff Sentell be bumping into them when he's watching the sophomore or junior player that's being recruited, by Georgia? Maybe, who knows? Maybe they'll recruit Jeff Sentell for a name, image, likeness deal, or his dog Peaches for, maybe I can see the collar flashing some ad. Everyone seems to like. I don't see any Peaches on this broadcast, by the way. I'm very disappointed. But how early will we see, these players gotten to is the $1 million, million, that's probably a bad phrase, is the big question for me. I suppose some players, just imagine though, guys, and think about this, when we get to the point where there is name, image, likeness, and I'm not picking on Zamir White, but think Zamir would have been a prime candidate for a name, image, likeness deal coming out of high school, and probably a one that had a lot of value to it, I would say, based on his ranking and based on the expectations. What happens to that deal when a guy like Zamir gets injured? Or let's say Dominic Blaylock. Now, Dominic came back early on his own because we thought he was a fast healer. But in the future, those are the kind of things we'll become very skeptical of. Dominic Blaylock has a name, image, likeness deal. Does he rush back from the end? This really, you think about all the issues and how it clouds things. Opting out, right? Will there be bonuses in place for players to play in bowl games? Will there be added incentive, or will that be a contractual obligation? Do they have incentive clauses? Does this muddy the waters as far as how coaches manage their teams? Coach, I need one more touchdown for my bonus to kick in. There's just so much to this that goes above and beyond just the concept of let's pay players, especially if we don't do a group deal, especially if it does becomes more individualized.
We're a couple of minutes away from wrapping up. Let me just make this point, and I don't mind, kind of being the contrarian in this a little bit. I actually don't think the current college football system, the one that's been in place for my lifetime, I don't view it as being unfair, even though it is now commonly thought to be unfair by a lot of really powerful people. Now, I'll tell you why. There's this general assumption that young talent, the kind that plays college football, the kind that plays a lot of sports, there's some sort of monetary value attached to that talent. I don't deny that's true. These guys are worth something. But when you look across the entire landscape of sports, monetizing young talent just doesn't really work very well. I mean, I'll give you a couple examples from other sports here for a moment. Young talent exists in baseball the same way it exists in football. The way of monetizing that young talent in baseball is kind of through the minor league baseball system, but the minor league baseball system is dangerously close to just not existing at all. They can't find a way to make any money on it. Therefore, I mean, this year there was no minor league baseball. It's going to exist in 2021 in a very, very small form. G League for basketball, that's not on anybody's, radar. Guys go to Europe. Most of the guys that go, my understanding is, don't enjoy it. I'm a huge golf fan. The Asian tour, the Latin American tour, ways in which young guys can kind of qualify for full PGA Tour status, they'll tell you that's not a very fun life. They're young, talented golfers, but finding a way to monetize that value, just not an easy thing to do. So football's way of doing it, I would say it's not necessarily any worse than the other sports that are out there, which frankly just can't figure out a way to make money off young talent. Anybody got any thoughts?
I think
there's more money in football to be made.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. It's like this huge pie of money when the FCC is collecting $50 million per team, and CBS's deal kind of gets one up with now new money from ABC. There's just this big pie of money, man. And like you read through all the stuff, you don't really make a lot of money off the jersey sales. No one does, not even the licensing companies. I saw a study where Johnny Manziel's jersey only made Texas A&M something like $70,000 a year in terms of the licensing. And I can't imagine a college athlete in the state of Texas, Heisman Trophy winner, that being any more popular a jersey than that one. There's just this thing about, coaches have these things. I think one of the things Senator Booker said, big Stanford man, he's a smart guy, played the game, but they're putting together an athlete's bill of rights where
not just because you went to Stanford doesn't necessarily make you smart.
Well, just because you're in Congress, does that necessarily not exactly?
We'll leave that alone.
No, it doesn't.
But go ahead and finish your point.
So there's so many things there that's like, you've got this pile of money, and you can do something for these young men. You hear about some of the new legislation that's on the Senate floor is lifetime scholarships or better medical care. I don't know how guys can get better medical care than they already do in cases this is some sort of loss of insurance, loss of income stream or whatever. But you've got so many of these guys that want to come back. Brandon, the way this should have worked, if you had a guy like Jake Fromm that was very much on the fence, that type of talent, and then you could say, because when I look back at this study of the name, image, and likeness agendas over the last couple of years, I think Jake Fromm was probably, to me, one of the only Georgia Bulldogs that would have qualified in terms of a brand that he could market himself on outside of the boundaries of his scholarship. I mean, he could be in a hunting apparel. He could be in a truck deal without a Georgia G, without the Georgia's intellectual property. I think Jake Fromm was a well-known enough face to kind of make some money on the side. And then if it was a player that needed that sort of income where they could get another extra $100,000 to come back for their senior year, I think that was something that could have mattered to the athlete that wanted to return. I think name, image, and likeness has a lot of times been a warning sign or a danger kind of Will Robinson something up ahead that this is going to make college football a lot more complicated when all they're really trying to do is extend a lot more marketing opportunities to athletes and try to give some sort of clearinghouse or some sort of excess governance on it, which we all know the NCAA does so famously well.
I want to give Mike and Connor the last word here, and we're going to wrap this up. This reminds me so much of when we first started talking about full cost of attendance a few years ago, giving schools a chance to give extra money to players to make up for, what they were spending on books or whatever else that didn't cover the, quote, full cost of attendance. You had programs like Auburn that were very aggressive on that, giving as much as like $8,000 extra when some people said there's no way the cost of living in Auburn is truly that high. And that was supposed to be this really big deal and this big advantage for recruiting. For the most part, it never really materialized. I think the same thing is going to probably be true with this. I don't think it's going to end up being that big of a deal because for the most part, players are not playing this game for a couple of extra $1,000. They're playing it, for the reasons that have been established over the course of the last, century or so. That you can talk about this. It sort of gives me a little bit of a tired head to kind of get too much into it because I don't think it's easy for everybody to wrap their brain around. But ultimately, I think whatever gets instituted is going to be a little bit like what full cost of attendance is going to be in the past, the kind of thing that we thought was a big deal, but we eventually just kind of forget about and move on. Connor and Mike?
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things where for so long it's a problem we've wanted to solve. And, in theory, it sounds like a great idea. It sounds like, yes, players should be able to get a percentage of the pie since they are the actual talent and putting their bodies on the line through the ringer to ultimately make a better lifestyle. But I think sort of like we've unfortunately seen with the universal healthcare debate, as great of an idea as it is, and in theory, as much as we like it and as great as it sounds, it's kind of hard to pull it off with all the other strings that we have attached at this point. So I'll be interested to see how the NCAA and how Congress ultimately decides to do this. I don't think it's going to be a true free market system where every player can absolutely make as much money as they possibly want. I think it's going to be somewhat less than that, and probably more, as the term BA used, a sort of group dynamic that comes with this name, image, and likeness bill.
Mike, you and I have talked about this before. I'm going to give you the last word here. I think this is something we're probably in agreement on, that if you went up and down the rosters of all the major college football programs and said, are you happy with the current deal you have? The overwhelming majority of players are quite happy with the current deal they already have. And that, to me, is something that always gets lost in this discussion.
Yeah, and it's funny, the rich is going to get richer. I know we saw the television ratings out a little earlier, and they talked about how the ratings were down for the national championship game. Some said it was Monday night. Some said some Alabama fatigue. I saw some people saying, you got to do something about this. I said, well, what do you want people to do, right? To me, the rich get richer out of NIL. I mean, obviously, a player for Alabama or Georgia or Florida is going to probably command more attention than somebody trying to get a deal at South Carolina or Arkansas or Mississippi. So it kind of flies in the face of, evening things out in college football. And that seems to be the offseason buzz now. People are talking about, well, what are some ways to even some things out? There's talk I saw where Deion Sanders is complaining. I guess he just now seeing the facility he's going to coach in. There's an article today, oh my gosh, our facilities aren't good. Our equipment is good. Yeah, no kidding, right? So now, are we going to see programs where now a portion of profits from programs are going to be shifted to FCS schools or historically Black schools to kind of level the playing field? You kind of wonder, is this in the future of college football? Name, image, likeness. One thing I do think is fascinating about FCS playing in the spring is they're going to have a platform like they've never had before. And this could provide them some opportunities for some Will we see FCS go back to fall football if they have a successful spring? So we talk about a lot of the different ways that schools are generating money and a lot of the ways that student athletes can become, in a more profitable situation. The thing that I don't want to lose sight of, and the thing that I hope that schools keep at the forefront and protect is the Olympic sports. I hope it doesn't come to an age. I know at Georgia it hasn't, but we've seen some programs get cut at other schools. Even Clemson, with all their football money, cut out their track and field program. That was a sad day to me. I hate to see other athletes not get opportunities, on account of all the money needing to go into football, trying to make it more competitive, when in fact football should be generating enough money to expand the Olympic sports program. I think that's something that happened in the Pac-12 as they got stretched a little thin because they have too many sports programs where their football programs didn't keep up with their facilities. So I don't think anybody has created the perfect wheel, so to speak. I still think there's room for some innovation. But with every change, there's going to be more challenges and more problems. And it's going to require someone to be a problem solver and a great innovator. And at every turn, with every rule that changes, it seems like no one can match Nick Saban or how he's able to manipulate this rule. So I tell people, be careful what you wish for, because I do believe this is an area where the strong will get stronger.
That is Mike Griffith, Connor Riley, Jeff Sintel, all a part of Cover 4 Live today. My name is Brandon Adams. Normally, this is the time we'd shift to Cover More, take your questions and comments. We're obviously not live today. We're not able to do that, but we'll look forward to being back in our normal time slot. The show's in its normal time slot. We're just not actually here right now. We're off doing whatever else. So thanks to you for being here, because we couldn't have a show if it were not for you. Enjoy the week. We'll see you back here again next week, this same time for Cover 4 Live, talking about everything going on around UGA. We'll look forward to speaking to you then, everybody.